Every 90 seconds, someone is reported missing. Many return to their families, but for others, something has gone seriously wrong. A 17-year-old girl has disappeared.
It was strange that she wasn't appearing anywhere on CCTV.
It's a case defined by a wall of silence.
You just didn't talk about it anymore.
If they speak out, then they put themselves at risk.
What happens in the police investigation that follows?
The longer the investigation went on, the less chance that she would be found alive.
What happens to the family at its heart?
There might have been tensions at home. Perhaps she had run away.
She needed an escape, and for her, her escape was, I'm going to drink bleach.
When missing turns to murder.
Shafeelia Ahmed's story is almost identical to my story, I have to say, growing up. So this was me, 39 years ago.
In the photos that we see of her, she's just got a lovely smile. She just comes across as a beautiful young girl with lots of promise ahead of her. She had a close circle of friends. She was very popular with her classmates. She was bright.
Her ambition was to be a lawyer. She wanted to be a barrister.
Shafeelia was very ambitious. She talked about wanting to go to university. And those are all very aspirational things, and also things which unfortunately horrified her parents.
Her parents were originally from Pakistan, from the Gujarat region. They had 5 children, 4 girls and 1 boy. Shafeelia was the eldest. Her dad had actually come to the UK before her mum, and he had settled here and actually married a white lady and had a son with her. And he later entered an arranged marriage with his cousin Fazana. He went off to Pakistan, married again, came here with Fazana and settled down. And we don't know how much he ever told people of this previous former life. By all accounts, he used to go out drinking, he would go out to clubs, he would go out to discos. Yeah, he kept all of this very quiet. He was so far removed from the life that he built with Fazana and the life that he tried to impose on his children.
The father was insistent that, in short, his daughter would live her life his way. And if that wasn't acceptable, then there would be repercussions.
Shafeelia had a westernised lifestyle. She went to a local school. She had friends who were not Muslims. There appeared to be a conflict. Her mother's attitude to the way the family should behave was very much that of the way a family would behave in rural Pakistan.
She wanted to bring that sense of Pakistan and that culture here to Warrington with her.
There is a focus on what other members of the community think of the family. There's a lot of emphasis on the honour of the family. When you have people in the community that would call each other and say, look at how your daughter dresses, look at what she's doing, look at who she's hanging around with.
Things that can bring shame are things like integrating. And I mean integrating, even talking to white people, seen as the other. My mother would say that to me very clearly. Things like cutting your hair, wearing makeup, going out with your mates, having a mobile phone, social networking, all these things can be deemed as shameful behaviours. If you don't conform to their expected level of behaviour, you end up feeling that, well, I must be a bad Muslim, I must be a bad Sikh, a bad daughter even.
It's just a social phenomenon that people kind of tie it in with religion, but really it's more a cultural thing. Whether people see that as a positive or a negative, that's for them to decide.
Being born in Britain, getting to a certain age in your life where you are told that you're behaving too westernised, that you have to be really careful about who you go out with, what you wear, and you're expected to behave in a certain way because by the age of 11, you understand that that's shameful.
She was interested in makeup, fashion, all the kind of things that young teenage girls are interested in. And she had tried to express this. She had tried to wear clothes that she wanted to wear. She was, interested in talking to boys, although her family would never allow that.
Shafila did have relationships with boys. Obviously, you know, you go to school with them, you get to know people, and she was texting them. But of course, all of that had to be hidden. It couldn't be on her mobile phone in case her parents would check it. So that kind of aspect of her life was very well hidden. It was almost an uncomfortable feeling being around the family because they seemed to be very controlled over everything they said or the conversations they had or what other family members would be doing.
She was reporting from a very young age, you know, I'm being abused by my mother and father. My mother calls me a prostitute, a whore.
She came to the attention of social services because she had run away for the day. So all the time underneath this sort of very respectable veneer, there were hints that things weren't quite right.
Shaheen knows two of Shafilia's sisters from going to the same mosque as children.
There was physical beatings. There was a lot of emotional abuse going on. There was a lot of isolation from Shafila where she wouldn't be allowed to sit with her siblings, where she'd be locked in the room or even outside. When Shafila was in the garden, they would try and pass food to her, you know, without her mum seeing.
Shafilia's siblings were aware that the tension was increasing. They knew that her parents were becoming more and more angry at her behaviour. They were, you know, insisting on picking her up from college, on bringing her home, checking what she was wearing, checking what was in her bag. They didn't want her wearing makeup. She'd have to wipe it off before she got home. So her siblings were witnessing this day in, day out.
A victim of honour abuse doesn't actually believe they are being abused because they're conditioned to believe this is normal. Believing that you're the perpetrator, that you're doing this to your family. And your family will make you feel that.
Sometimes her parents kept her at home until the bruises went down, but she did sometimes go to school with bruises.
Her reporting was very brave because Shafila would have been taught, just like me, to be silent, that speaking outside of the family is disrespectful. And indeed, every time she did speak outside the family, the risk to her escalated in terms of the abuse towards her.
Every day she had to go back home to her parents, to the people who were making her life such a misery.
Shafila wanted to escape from home. Life for her just was absolute hell, which is why she'd run away. They kind of set the bed up to look like Shafila was still in bed, but they helped her get her stuff out of the window and climb out. She was made to feel guilty, and that's why she went back.
The power of this concept called honour keeps her oppressed. Our victim is deprived of any rights, freedom or independence, believing that is normal. And if that behaviour is reinforced by you being told this is part of your religion, your tradition and your culture, you end up believing it even more. What they're defending is what is normal to them because they've never had a counter-narrative. And if somebody says, well, what, you're marrying a stranger? Or what, you're not allowed to go out with white people or your mates? They would say, well, you don't understand because you're not from that background and that culture.
Yes, you're supposed to teach them right from wrong, but it's not for you to take away their freedom and their happiness and kind of put them in this cage. It makes me really, really angry.
By the time she gets to the age of 16 years old, there came a point where she's saying, they'll take me abroad and they're going to force me into a marriage. So her reporting changed. Her life is mapped out for her. You know, it's dishonourable to have ambition. Who do you think you are? You're thinking above your own station here. You're getting married off.
The family eventually decided that they would deal with her by taking her to Pakistan.
16-year-old Shafilia Ahmed has been struggling to conform to her parents' expectations. It seems they are determined to bring her into line by going to extreme measures.
They arranged a family holiday to Pakistan to attend the wedding of a relative over there.
The only way that her parents could get her onto that plane is by giving her sleeping tablets. And we think that Iftikhar had been prescribed sleeping tablets for insomnia. And then what he then did was crush these up in some fruit juice and give these to Shafila. Shafila was desperately unhappy in Pakistan. She wanted to escape. Her mum and dad had her passport, scared to death that they might marry her off.
The intention was always that Shafila would stay in Pakistan. There was never any intention of bringing her back.
She's been punished. She's been taught a lesson. So she has no way out whatsoever. You can't run out the front door in this village because everybody will spot you and they'll send you straight back to your house. There's nowhere to go. Her parents are there, the family are around her. They'll all be thinking the same thing. You bad human being, how dare you do this to this family?
Those talks of a marriage to one of her cousins.
Shafila, because of the way she behaved, the chances of marrying her off became more and more remote because within the community in which they lived, she was regarded as a rebellious daughter.
You end up feeling suicidal. And there are higher tendencies for South Asian women in Britain, aged between 16 to 24 years old, to self-harm or have suicidal tendencies, which are 3 to 4 times higher than the national average.
She needed an escape, and for her, her escape was, I'm going to drink bleach. Because it's hopefully going to end all of this.
It speaks to that isolation, that where do I turn? There's nowhere to go.
She was so desperate that she drank bleach because she didn't want to be married off to somebody of her parents' choosing. She suffered huge injuries. She had to have hospital treatment for this. She had severe burns in her throat, in her esophagus.
She can't be married off in Pakistan because she's damaged goods at that point.
After Shafila had drank the bleach, her dad left her there and came back to the UK. He cashed in her ticket and asked for a refund. He got £250 back for her ticket. And for a couple of months, he stayed here whilst Shafila was in Pakistan.
Her injuries are so severe that they can't adequately be dealt with by the Pakistani medical system. And so the family in Pakistan basically get in touch with Iftikhar and say, you know, you've got to take this girl home.
All of her throat was completely burnt from the bleach. She was very much skin and bones. It was only when Shafila was getting worse and worse that they were forced to buy a return ticket.
She has a hospital stay for a number of weeks.
Of course, the nurses, all the medical staff, they all had questions. You know, how on earth did you come to drink this bleach in Pakistan?
And the story was told that actually she drank it by accident. She thought it was mouthwash.
That was a story her parents told everybody, and they made sure that was the official story.
Her parents sit around her bed day and night. To the health professionals, what loving parents.
In fact, what her parents were trying to do was to sit there and guard her.
One, she's not telling anybody what happened in Pakistan, and she doesn't. And secondly, she's not leaving without them, and she leaves with them. People were not seeing the parents as perpetrators here, and that young girl is sent back to her family home, the place that is unsafest.
She wanted to go back to school, and her parents wanted to stop that. So there were calls being made from school, or her friends would come and knock on for Shafila. She wasn't allowed to have any contact with them. She wasn't allowed a mobile phone. If people came to the door, they moment on.
Her parents thought that far from being subdued, she was returning to what they regarded as her bad old ways.
Once again, all the tension started. They wanted her to wear traditional clothes, and so the arguments started again, the abuse started again, until eventually in 2003 she suddenly disappears. Shafila had run away before, and so they simply told everybody that she had run away again.
Her best friend Melissa notices that she's missing. School noticed that she's missing.
Rumours were starting to go around the school. People were starting to talk about the fact that, you know, her parents had done something to her and that she'd never be seen again. A couple of times, Shafila's sisters had gone to school and told her friends that her parents had killed her. They had actually said this in school, but then they had laughed it off and said, oh, we're only joking, we don't know where she is.
It was the school who eventually reported that she was failing to turn up for school.
The fact that a teacher had raised suspicions, I think, says a lot, that the teacher has more of an interest in Shafilia's welfare.
And that led to the police becoming involved in what was a missing person inquiry to start with.
The police had interviewed her parents, her teachers, her friends, trying to find out what had happened to her.
They became more and more aware as they made inquiries of her friends and her school that there had been issues between Shafilia and her parents.
They had started to look at CCTV footage, and what the police were saying very early on was that it was strange that she wasn't appearing anywhere on CCTV. It was simply as if she had vanished without a trace. When I first got interested in the story, and I actually went and knocked on the family's door and introduced myself to the family and asked them about Shafilia, you know, how are you worried about her, what's going on? They said to me, well, what was the point? The police can't find her. The police have just said to us, oh, she's run away before, she's just run away again, she'll come home eventually. They just simply shrugged their shoulders and said, oh, well.
Shafilia's father was asked the question. Now, this is a strict Muslim man that we understand had raised his daughter in this way. When he was asked the question, why didn't you report your daughter missing? His response for me rang alarm bells immediately, which was, well, I just thought that she was at a boyfriend's house.
If your daughter's running around with a guy, it's just seen as a very shameful thing.
Alarm bells just rang for me. You don't even look at a boy, let alone date a boy.
The family had said that perhaps she had run away with a boyfriend, but they couldn't name that boyfriend. None of her friends knew that she was planning to run away. This time she hadn't said anything to anybody. It seemed that there was just no evidence that she had run away at all.
That's kind of the story that the community believed in, actually. This is just Shafilia just running off and, you know, disrespecting her family.
They seemed less concerned with the fact that Shafilia was missing and more concerned with how people were portraying them. Partly I feel they felt that because I was an Asian reporter that I would understand their concerns about stereotyping, about the way that their story was being portrayed, and that might be partly why they let me into their home.
The feeling was that Mr. and Mrs. Ahmed were kind of the victims of Shafilia's behaviour. Everybody just felt more sympathy towards Mr. and Mrs. Ahmed in the community. So they kind of saw it as an invasion, that the police were asking all these questions, that there was all this media interest.
Shafilia's parents' version of events is not ringing true with Cheshire Police.
The feeling was amongst the investigating officers that they were not showing the concern that parents would normally show in those circumstances.
They started to look at Shafilia's bank accounts and realised that she hadn't withdrawn any money, nothing had been touched. And so the police start to grow increasingly suspicious about the family.
The Ahmeds are unhappy with how their story is unfolding in public.
The dad was very angry about the way the press were writing about it. He seemed less angry about the fact that his daughter was missing. And because they were so defiant in the face of the press and in all of their interviews, I was always intrigued as to what exactly their role had been in her disappearance, and I tried to keep an open mind through it all.
Shafilia's parents go on the offensive and hire a lawyer.
The family approached me and they were obviously concerned, as I understood it, that their story wasn't being put, that the story is being distorted. They believed that they were being labelled, even at that early stage, as an honour killing. They believed it was racially motivated.
You know, there might have been tensions at home, there might have been an unhappiness, and perhaps she had run away.
Their account was put as succinctly and as fairly and as transparently as possible, and that's exactly what we did.
With Shafilia's parents pursuing their own agenda, police step up their investigation.
Police, when they're investigating on abuse cases, it's highly unlikely they're going to get evidence from within the family. So they have to think about other tactics, you know, covert tactics.
Police had consent to put a covert listening device into the family home.
And they put a number of bugs into the home and also Iftikar's taxi. So on some of the recordings, we hear Iftikar saying, that even if he had killed 40 people, the police couldn't prosecute him unless there was evidence. And although you might think that it sounds very incriminating, that in itself isn't evidence.
And they did hear some very interesting conversations, but there was never an explicit admission.
It certainly wasn't enough to charge the parents.
Shafilia's investigation took a long time in terms of gathering evidence and identifying potential suspects.
The longer the investigation into the missing person went on, the less chance that they thought there would be that she would be found alive.
As the weeks went on, the coverage about Shafilia's disappearance started to change. It went from being about a missing person to possibly about a girl who had been killed. And headlines started to appear about a so-called honour killing. And this is when the family start to change, because we see them becoming more and more defensive. They were so angry about the fact that they had been linked somehow to Shafilia's death.
I did resent that at the time, I have to say. I was very anxious, as a Jewish person, to be frank, that they were not tarred with that without proper investigation, without proper proof of it. I didn't want to believe it because I didn't want English people to believe that Asian people then generally behave in that way. I say that from an ethnic point of view. I was desperately keen to put their side of the story because I hoped that they were telling the truth, because I knew what the repercussions were, that then those with racist tendencies would use that as the vehicle for then generalising and saying, we told you so.
The police started to hold press conferences where they wouldn't invite the family. This seems to have been a deliberate tactic, not consulting with the family to appeal for information. On one occasion, in a press conference, suddenly in burst the family. Iftika and Fazana marched into that press conference.
And all the cameras turned to them. And they basically accused Cheshire Police of being racist. Now, it was absolutely a shock to hear that.
You know, it was a very unusual tactic. Police very quickly disappeared from that press conference.
What they're actually doing is using that in order to put Cheshire Police on the back foot.
I do not like racism of any sort, and this was potentially a vehicle for people to express that.
And their solicitor gave a very combative press statement where he accused the police of Islamophobia, he accused them of racial stereotyping, he said that the parents were extremely angry at the way that suspicion had fallen on them.
I, in a sense, wrongly, I think, I saw it as a campaign, really, as well as defending them. It was very close to my heart in that sense.
They were trying to hide behind culture and race. And we hear this all the time in cases. And this is where professionals are feeling really concerned about being called a racist. And then they get more concerned about not wanting to tread on cultural toes.
It seemed now that there were open hostilities between the police and the family. You know, without naming them publicly, the police made it very clear that they felt she had been murdered. This is now what people believed had happened to Shafilia Ahmed.
It's 2004. 16-year-old schoolgirl Shafilia Ahmed disappeared 5 months ago, and the police investigations have drawn a blank. Finally, there's a discovery which breaks the case wide open.
5 months after Shafilia went missing, up in Cumbria, in the Lake District, a couple of workmen came across a body that had been washed up.
There'd been flooding in the area. The remains had obviously been there for some time, and so the body was decomposed. Investigations to identify the body took place, and obviously there was forensic examination, DNA comparisons, and it was confirmed to be Shafilia. Circumstances in which the body was found indicated that she had been murdered.
So this was no longer a missing inquiry, this was now a murder inquiry.
A body is not dumped over a wall in the Lake District if the circumstances in which that person met their death are not suspicious. The floodwaters had dislodged certain parts of the body, so it was not all together in the same place. Very distressing for all involved. Forensically, there was nothing that the remains could tell us about how she was killed. There were no obvious broken bones, no obvious injuries to the skull, and so the speculation was that the most likely cause of death would be either strangulation or suffocation.
When Shafilia's body was found, it changed everything. The way her body was found, it was in a really, really horrible way, and that she must have had a really horrible death. It really upset me that somebody in the community had died, and died in such a horrific manner.
So they arrested the parents on suspicion of murder and interviewed them, but at that point there was insufficient evidence to charge them, so they were released on bail pending a continuation of the investigation. The Crown Prosecution Service and a QC, leading counsel, expressed the view that evidence would become available in the future if one of the family was prepared to break ranks and tell the truth about what had happened.
Here's a family that shut down. The community shut down. The wall of silence comes up from family and community because they will collude, they will conspire. Witness intimidation in these cases is very, very high. Families will come together and they will decide how they're going to deal with the person who's dishonored the family. In this case, it was murder for Shafilia Ahmed. But then after that, they will collude again and conspire. How are we going to keep the professionals on the outside? And they will all have been told how to do that. So the police are up against that silence.
Shafilia's brothers and sisters are giving the police the same story as Fazana and Iftika, her parents. They're all saying that Shafilia ran away from home as far as they know, that they didn't see anything else happen to Shafilia, and that's what they believe, and that's what they're telling the police.
Lack of cooperation from family members, from community members. You know, nobody saw anything, nobody heard anything, etc. So building a case on the basis of that is very difficult to do. I first heard about Shafilia's body being found through the news, like most people. And what I felt angry about was, where were the people in the community coming out to say this was wrong?
Whoever had thoughts on Mr. and Mrs. Ahmed's involvement, they wouldn't voice them. The only thing that really changed in the community is that you just didn't talk about it anymore.
Where's the religious leader? I didn't hear them and I didn't see them. Nobody, which is why it was important for us to come out and speak.
It was never about the family and how they felt they were victims of the police or the whole process. It's just, you have to remember who it's about, and it's about Shafilia.
Shafilia's funeral takes place in August 2004. It is well attended by family, friends, and the local community.
They knew it could have been the parents. They didn't say that. I didn't hear that loud enough. There was no outcry in that Muslim community. Here is an opportunity for you to reinforce that this is not part of religion. You know, it's not part of one's traditional culture. This is abuse. In fact, all their silence did was reinforce the message that if you behave like Shafilia, you should know better. So thankfully, Cheshire Police continued their investigation, and throughout the number of years, we continued to keep Shafilia Ahmed's face in the public domain as a charity. That was important.
Over time, the truth about Shafilia's abuse becomes an unbearable burden for one of her sisters.
For one reason or another, she started opening up to me about when Shafilia would be locked outside. She was telling me about how Shafilia would quite often be beaten up, how Shafilia wasn't allowed to do anything. And then it became clear to me, actually, just what life was like at home. She had a very similar life to what Shafilia did, in terms of everything was controlled. She would, be watched if she went outside the house. Her mobile phone would be controlled late at night. The one thing I really understood was, this girl needs help. This girl really needs to get away. And that was always the underlying, tone of all the conversations, all the discussions that we had, is that ultimately she needed to understand that she can't live like that. We didn't have this friendship where you have all these great memories for things that you did together. Our friendship was based on the fact that she opened up to me about things that went on at home, and I was kind of the person she would turn to when things got really bad.
Siblings watching this behaviour of parents punishing one of their sisters is a very difficult position for them, because if they speak out, then they put themselves at risk.
She had a genuine fear for her life. We were always afraid that something would happen to her, or if her mum and dad had found out about her speaking to me, that actually it would be both of us in a situation where something might happen. We believe that.
Over the next few years, things seemed to quieten down. There's no new evidence. There was an inquest 5 years after Shafeelia died in 2008, and the coroner concluded that he believed she had been murdered in the most vile circumstances possible, and he all but pointed the finger at the family. And what's astonishing here, again, is that instead of just keeping his head down, Iftikhar challenges this. He tried to take the coroner to court. He tried to bring out a judicial review against the coroner's findings. Iftikhar and Fazana came to believe that they had got away with murdering their own daughter. The police investigation didn't seem to be going anywhere. There was less and less press coverage about this. But then something strange happened in 2010.
It's 7 years after Shafeelia disappeared. Could a bizarre sequence of events produce the breakthrough in this case?
There was an armed robbery at the family home. Some people had broken into the home, tied up the parents, and robbed them of jewellery and a large amount of cash.
3 males had turned up at the house and were carrying what appeared to be a gun.
And I was astonished when they said to me, "We believe it was her sister's friends, Shafeelia's younger sister." And so I asked them, "What, you mean your own daughter robbed you?"
The parents of murdered teenager Shafeelia Ahmed have accused their second daughter of robbing them.
They believe she herself had orchestrated that robbery at their home. They started telling me about the fact that she had fallen in with a bad crowd, which struck me as very odd because this is exactly what they used to say to me about Shafeelia.
She was arrested. It was during the course of that interview that she asked to speak to police officers about another matter.
For years, her family had been saying to her to keep her mouth shut, not to tell anybody. They'd been threatening her. And in the end, it was just too much. Any girl to live with this when you're just 16 years old.
And she indicated then that she was prepared to talk to them about what had happened to her sister Shafeelia. She was the first member of the family to break ranks.
There was a real internal struggle going on for her. That struggle led to her telling the truth about what she had witnessed.
That's when everything came out. She told a very distressing story about what happened in their home the night Shafeelia was killed.
She made a statement, a very detailed account of the circumstances in which her parent had killed her sister Shafeelia.
This was what they had been waiting for all of these years. The police had the evidence that they needed to charge their parents with murder.
It was not entirely clear right up to the first day of the trial whether she would actually open her mouth and say anything. But she did.
She was the key prosecution witness. She took the stand and she gave testimony to Shafeelia's life.
She was screened from her parents. The jury could see her. They were absolutely gripped by what she was saying. She gave an account of how her mother had gone to collect Shafeelia from her part-time job in a call centre. Shafeelia was apparently wearing a short-sleeved T-shirt, was showing her arms, and this had upset her mother.
The mum had told her off, had called her names, had said, "How dare you wear such clothes?" When they got home, that argument continued. Iftikhar, the dad, had got involved.
Fazana suddenly decided that she'd had enough, and she said words to the effect of, "Let's finish it here." She described how Shafila was held down by her parents on a sofa. A plastic bag was stuffed into her mouth. They put their hands over her mouth and nose, so she was effectively being suffocated. And the children who were all present watched their parents kill their sister. She described in great detail how Shafila kicked her legs and how actually, as she was losing control, she urinated on the sofa. And just the detail of how she saw her sister die was so compelling that it was quite clear she was telling the truth about what she'd seen.
It was obvious in court, listening to the evidence, that Shafila's death had a huge impact on her brothers and sisters, and it was extremely harrowing for them. They had to live with this terrible burden and this terrible guilt of what they had witnessed.
They would have been given a message in witnessing that murder. 1, you don't tell anybody what you saw. 2, if you do, this is what will happen to you.
She was offered protection from her family. The trial was receiving quite a lot of publicity nationally, and police were contacted by a young woman called Shaheen Munir. She thought she had information which would be useful to the police investigating the case. And by this time, the trial was well underway. The police met with Shaheen, and Shaheen told them that she had been so impressed by her courage in coming forward to give evidence that she felt that she wanted to tell the police what she knew.
Years ago, there was one thing Shafila's other sister couldn't say out loud.
I suggested to her, then write it down in a letter. At that point, I did have an inkling that it would be about Shafila. I knew this was a big thing for her. I knew it took a lot for her to actually be able to trust me to this extent. She messaged me saying that, okay, I've written it down. She was going to town that day with her mum, so I kind of got there first, and as they walked past, she dropped the letters behind her. Without her mum seeing, I picked them up and I left as quick as I could. In fact, I didn't even look at them until I got home into my bedroom, and I sat on my bedroom and I remember I sat cross-legged and I started opening the letters.
She had disclosed to Shaheen Munir that she had been present when her parents had killed her sister.
Yeah, so it just describes the night she was murdered. They sat Shafila down on this chair, so they had this one chair where they would always sit her, and the family would kind of gather around, and that's when they just started abusing her and you know, beating her. One would hold her while the other one would just physically abuse her. They'd get a plastic bag and I think they put it in her mouth and held it down on the sofa, and Shafila struggled until she stopped, and then the kids were told to go upstairs in the room. Her dad got rid of the body, and her mum, after, came in the bedroom and just got into bed with them, like everything was normal. And from that point onwards, the kids understood, you'll never talk about this. She asked for her letters back, which I kind of knew she would. I think she was too afraid that somebody would find out. I remember that night I actually ended up making photocopies, not to kind of betray her in any way, but actually just to keep for myself to understand her. She didn't know I'd photocopied them, and when we met up, I ended up giving her the original ones back. And without even thinking, she ripped them up.
It was quite clear when police had spoken to Shaheen Munir that she was a crucial witness for the prosecution, and she gave evidence.
I always understood the notion of honour within a family. I always understood the notion of shame within a community, but I never believed that you could take it so far that you would kill your own.
The judge called this girl as a witness. She did not agree that she had seen her parents murder her sister. She said that the story that she'd written and shown to Shaheen had been free writing, creative writing, and she'd just been writing stories and there was no truth in it whatsoever. It wasn't an account of a murder.
The other siblings who jumped to the defence of their parents doesn't surprise me, because they've aligned their loyalty to the parents. It could be that they're fearful for their own lives. It could be that they have to live in that community and this is what the community expect of them. So that decision would not have been taken lightly.
She was in an impossible position because the account that she'd given to Shaheen chimed so closely with the account that her sister had given that it was impossible that she might by chance have made up a story. It just wasn't plausible.
They were convicted 25 years with no parole. I have to say, myself and many people in the sector were elated. It's never going to bring Shafelia back.
It's taken 9 years for Shafelia's sister to find the strength to speak out.
This young girl's bravery, I believe, was ultimately what sealed the fate of her parents. So you're also living with the fact that you've also convicted your parents and now having to live a life in protection, which I believe she'll have to live in that space for the rest of her life, most likely. Nowhere in Islam, Sikhism or Hinduism does it say it is acceptable for you to murder your child.